Rajan is attending from SF, and me and Dr. Arjun, we both attending from Bangalore. And wherever you are, a great, very warm welcome uh, to this 60-minute conversation. Uh, the topic, you would have definitely gone through it, and that's why you're here, and that's about building with GenAI. Uh, so we know that that's the hottest topic going around in the industry, and everybody is going gaga over this. Everybody is trying to see how they would like to leverage GenAI to solve business problems, to build organizations, to build applications, and see how incremental value could be added to personal projects as well as, say, enterprise-grade projects. So let me introduce myself. My name is Amit Chaudhary. I am a part of Upeka cohort, and I run this upskilling startup called Incurious. And what we do is that we design learning experiences to help organizations upskill their data teams. We have exclusive focus on the skill sets which are required for upskilling and bringing up highly productive data teams. We focus on personas like data analyst, data engineer, data scientist, data quality engineer, cloud engineers, and a lot more. However, since ChatGPT came in, my own experience with this was that it was a mind-blowing tool and an amazing tool which could talk to you like a human. I had stopped coding for a while, and but it kind of revived my own interest in coding and solving my problems because it could generate code on the fly. And one of the sectors which got impacted both positively and negatively was the education sector, and that is still under impact. And similarly, I believe there's a lot of industry which also has got impacted in both ways. And that's why we are here to understand from two personalities. One who is a tech enthusiast like Rajan, who is also a partner at Upeka, and is helping out a lot of startups in embracing AI, and he is an evangelist of AI. On the other side, we have Dr. Arjun, who is a renowned academician, and he is also an AI practitioner running his own startup called fastcode.ai. And I'm really excited to look forward to the perspectives from the two of them on just trying to decrypting Gen AI and trying to understand how good this technology is. Is it helpful in building sustainable, profitable startups, companies, right? And also from a upskilling perspective, how effective or how much it is going to impact the data teams, the current existing structure and the workings of the data teams. So let me get started with Rajan. Rajan, if you could, for the audience who might be outside of Upeka, if you could give a very quick introduction and a perspective from you on the question, why should I care about GenAI?
Yeah, so thanks, Amit. So I was smiling when you said, I'm an enthusiast. I actually was not an enthusiast till ChatGPT happened. And the reason for that was in 2007, I built a computer vision startup. And Arjun and I were chatting, we have like common friends. I graduated from IIIT Hyderabad in 2003, 20 years ago, the CS degree and computer vision major. And I did my first startup. I hand built Sift vectors and built a mobile based application that will allow you to do visual search. And after I had built it, I mean, I'd come from IIIT and was very, very excited about computer vision. And then I built this, and then later I saw that it didn't have practical application. I had competitors like Nevin Vision and Rhea. Many people may not know these names because Rhea was folded inside Google. Nevin Vision also was acquired by Google because Nevin Vision had that patent from David Pro, who came up with Sift vectors. But back then, there was no practical business application that could be solved. It was doing great in academia. There were some people who were excited about some aspects of doing this. And AI itself had gone through a lot of winters, right? At least 3 or 4 winters it had gone through. My enthusiasm actually returned back in March of last year, right? And I would actually say that, any company that is building deep tech in India would bleed to death. And I changed my view when I saw some of the deep tech companies are changing and like, solving real business problems. So for me, where I get animated is whenever I see that a technology is there and it can actually cross product market fit, where it can actually solve business applications. So I use that as a way to introduce myself, which is like, I was a CS grad 20 years ago, 2007. I built a computer vision startup, and startup is what led me to get into product management. Then I spent some time at Intuit, and 6 years ago I started Upeka. And I'm very, very fascinated whenever I'm able to see something where it is a technology, but it can translate into a business impact. ChatGPT showed the entire world that yes, it is possible. Of course, like, it blew up, and like, based on how, when you check, it's either 180 million or 185 million users that are there. And those who actually follow product market fit, they would say that, retention is more critical. So retention, you look at acquisition, then you look at retention, and then you look at revenue. There is also mention of ChatGPT itself, driving $1 billion of revenue. So there are like very clear indicators of that an AI product at a mass level is being able to take off from a product market fit. And I can say that except for very, very niche use cases in, let's say, machine vision or some sort of robotics, which is like, in a very highly controlled environment, this is one of the first points in time where, like, mass level product market fit is happening, right? And that's what makes me very, very excited about ChatGPT and GenAI. And I will talk about GenAI and like, how I think about GenAI as we continue. Back to you, Amit.
Thanks, Rajan. I'd put the same question to Dr. Arjun, like what makes you care about GenAI? What makes you excited about it? And yeah, definitely with your introduction a bit for the audience.
Sure. So I'll quickly introduce myself. Like Rajan, I'm also a computer science engineer from RV College 2005. I was Amit's senior. And I have been dabbling with machine learning since 2006, 2007. I did my PhD in computer graphics with applied machine learning. So did things for movies like Adventures of Tintin in 2011. But like Rajan said, this was a time when there were very specialized use cases of machine learning in all these fields. But I was always an enthusiast, and I kind of had an inkling and intuition that maybe this is gonna pan out in the long run. I mean, fortunately for me, I had not burnt my fingers like Rajan, so probably it gave me a little bit more faith. Uh, and then this crossover happened, right? So when I finished my PhD in 2011, I then joined NYU. And a funny story is I joined Chris Bregler, and Chris was kind of in a different mode at that time. And then Yann was my next door office neighbor. And this is pre-2013, pre-AlexNet, when he was still not famous and his papers were not being published. And he was like, do you want to work together? I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And that is how I got into the world of deep learning. And just post deep learning, very quickly, we saw that this over that bridge of a product market fit. And it was for the first time algorithms were good enough to be deployed in production. So the likes of Benz approached us and wanted to know if this could, somehow be fitted in their cars. And now, of course, we have them all. But yeah, that was the beginning of all of it. And coming to Gen AI, I mean, this was 2013. And then a decade later in 2013 is when ChatGPT came out. So I was sometimes, like, maybe my imposter syndrome used to kick in, and I was like, man, am I on the right career path? Because ML is maybe stagnating since deep learning and nothing new has happened. There were transformers, but they were not really that different, and so on and so forth. But when ChatGPT came out, that was like an aha moment for us, and there's no looking back.
Amazing.
Yeah, we can talk about more about Gen AI
Yeah.
the course of this discussion, but
Sure.
yeah, over to you.
Awesome. So going a little back, what happened in 2017, Rajan, when this paper came out, right? Attention is all you need. And suddenly it seemed that the world flipped over, right? I mean, it took a few years. I mean, it was already there in 2017. And but in streamline in the main workforce, like I've been part of companies like Fractal and all, and they've been solving problems for organizations. But with ChatGPT coming in, the idea of LLMs coming in, and suddenly the paper came into picture. What was your take on
Guys,
it?
can you mute? Ankur, can you please mute yourself?
Yeah, thanks. So, question to you, Rajan. Like, what changed with transformers? Like, I mean, how the world of working in machine learning, deep learning changed after this?
Yeah, I would perhaps only give like a high level view.
Yeah,
And even though I mean both of us are CS engineers, and I've stopped coding like 10 years ago. I love reading some research papers, but I stopped coding. So like technically we should ask Arjun, but I'd still like take a shot at it, right? So see, for me, I was very so the subject that I did in 2003 that one of our professor did, CV Jawahar, that Arjun also knows, is a neural network. Was very, very fascinated with single layer neural network, neural network. But it was the breakthrough in 2013 around deep learning, which is like how you can like use GPUs, and how you can actually come up with neural network architectures which can solve problems which were previously unthinkable. This is what surprised people. But when again, like the reference that you are making, that was the paper called Attention is All You Need, where what they were initially trying to solve is this machine translation. I think they were trying to solve the problem of translating from machine to English. And then when they proposed a certain architecture and said that, if we use this architecture of the neural network with a certain way of how the multi-layer neural network is structured with, decoders and encoders, that again surprised everyone. So one of the things, the way science happens is that you tinker, and then like something happens, and many a times you're not even able to explain why it works, right? And it happened around like the AlexNet time, and it happened around the transformer architecture. But a lot of these small changes that happened, right? And one other I would say a big breakthrough was in terms of how you are able to create feedback loops, right? When you add up a lot of these, and then you say, hey, can I go and solve a particular problem? And then that becomes like, human acceptable level. Then suddenly everybody sat down and took notice, right? So this architecture, it was not as if that somebody had come up with a mathematical breakthrough. It was like, researchers, people that are tinkerers, they're always like, trying to see, hey, if we made this change, then what happens? If we made that change, what happens? One other thing that you could also say in hindsight is that, computing power was like, widely available. GPUs were widely available. Data was widely available. So a lot of those trends came and converged together. But in my mind, the key aspect was the change in the architecture. Right. And it's like, how one would think about like, how steam engines or how car engines evolved. It is a change of like, an architecture that happens, which makes the combustion really, really strong, like, strong. So in that way, the transformer architecture was very, very critical in making these change happen. The effect of transformer was eventually felt in 2022 or 2023, right? When the OpenAI team came up. And it's very ironic, even though the architecture was discovered in Google, it was actually popularized and took to the market in a big way by OpenAI, right? So so therefore, my definition of GenAI, I tell people is that, look, of course, there is an element of generative, as in like, you are able to give some prompt, and then it is able to come up with like, outcomes or outputs that are not in the data set, or it is something that feels like it has been generative. That's why it is generative. But my own definition of Gen AI is that if you don't use architectures which are transformer or more powerful architectures beyond transformer, then we are talking about a traditional AI, right? And all the traditional AI, in terms of the impact, in terms of the problem solving ability of those, are much limited compared to these architectures and beyond. Like I said, Arjun is the more technical expert. We should ask him.
Definitely. No, Rajan, it was insightful. So Arjun, I'll just put the question in this way. I have experienced working with probabilistic models, right? Like simple probabilistic models. For image generation, there were GANs already available, right? And then there were your RNNs to create sequential text, and then there were some experiments with BERT, Robert going on in Google. But then amongst all that, as Rajan said, that there was a traditional AI, and there's suddenly post transformers, there's a new way of doing AI. Can you throw a little bit more light on this, like why, what happened, right, in that, and how
Yeah,
it changes?
sure. So, see, the way I see traditional AI and the new AI is something that I can talk about in the second part of my, statement. But the way I see, firstly, transformers are essentially self-attention. We can go into details of that later. But like Rajan said, it was a paradigm shift in terms of the architecture, in terms of how things were processed, in terms of, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it, and we can talk about details if interested. But the way I see things is, so generative is essentially, like all the things that you said. So, for example, GANs, they are implicit. So they're implicit and explicit. So these are implicit because there's no direct way of training these GANs and so on. But these are all generative models. Technically, generative means that you're learning the entire probability distribution of all the variables involved. Discriminative essentially means that it's conditional. Why? Conditional x1, x2, xz, right? So what you sometimes need is just one output. But what happened in GenAI was that you were generating a sequence, you were generating, and we're talking only about LLMs, right? So there is generative sound, generative music, generative images, and so on. But talking only of text, it was an engineering marvel, because though it was invented in the 2018s and 19s in Google, and Google was playing with it, but then there were some people who really believed in it and gave it all that they had, right? These big GPU farms, internet scale data corpuses, and you train a autoregressive model, meaning it only predicts the next word. So it is always trained. The fundamental model is trained on predicting only the next word. But by doing that, and by seeing all the text on the internet, it learns these higher level concepts. It learns what is 1+1. It learns what is the capital of India, and much more. So there are multiple levels of hierarchy. It is also shown that models of different size learn different ways and depths of explanation and so on. So now what has happened is, now for the first time, I never liked the word AI, because I was like, what is AI? AI is machine learning, where you fit a model, it's like curve fitting. But now we're closer to where you can use the word AI interchangeably with ML. Now these are general models, right? I mean, now going into how you use it, you can ask it any generic question and it gives you an answer, and you can build your module, your app around it. So this is how, in my mind, it is different from traditional machine learning, where you have a data set, you train a model, you get an output, versus this modern way of doing things.
Interesting.
Amit, let me just jump in on the last sentence that Arjun said,
Yes.
right? So a lot of people have this confusion. I also want to just add just few sentences on this. See, AI, machine learning, LLM, there are like overlaps, right? So AI traditionally, I mean, just if you just break down the word artificial intelligence, right? So however humans were intelligent, can we make machines intelligent equal to that level? This is what the artificial intelligence is termed as, and this is like, 70, 80-year-old concept. Since the 1950s, it has been around. The first paradigm that came up was saying that, look, if we have to make machines intelligent, then what is the way to make the machine intelligent? So the first way people thought, I think, and then maybe it was Marvin Minsky who started saying that, can we actually turn this into intelligence, can be coded as rules, and can we actually feed these rules, right? So that was the first paradigm. The second paradigm that came was saying that, look, that's not how humans learn, right? That's not how humans become intelligent. The way humans become intelligent is by learning, and learning comes through observation. And observation is like, the way you would teach a kid, where you'd say, okay, this object is apple, right? That's what you would say. So in a similar way, can we make the machines learn by giving inputs and outputs, as opposed to saying, hey, here is the code, or here is the rule for you to learn the intelligence. So in some sense, you can say, like, machine learning is this one approach of helping like a computer become intelligent. Then deep learning is saying that, look, there are many ways of doing machine learning. There is, like, using the probability theory, using the statistical like approaches, and there is a way of using neural networks.
Right.
So the way of using neural networks is this what was, like, very, very hot in the 70s and the 80s, and then it became completely dead, except for people like Alan, advisor and things like that. And then they came up with a breakthrough in deep learning in 2013. And then suddenly everybody were like, look, this way of doing machine learning is far superior than any other way of doing machine learning. And then in 2018, another architecture came called transformer. And they said, this type of architecture in this type of deep learning, in this type of machine learning is far more powerful in, like, getting us to artificial intelligence. So I agree with Arjun in the sense that, look, like, when you say AI, you're, like, talking about the broader concept. But when you say large language model or transformer architecture, you're talking about that type of AI, which is the most powerful and the one that is going to work and is going to have like a business impact. So when you say AI, traditional AI, and like, LLM based AI, like, for people who care, I think they should know this difference.
Very much, very much. Thanks, Rajan, for that clarification. So back to you, Rajan, with the next question. The theme of the session was build with GenAI, right? So now we are all excited about this new technology, and we know that, okay, there's a new way of doing AI, and this first time we can, as Arjun said, that we can call it AI, artificial intelligence. So what are the use cases, you being in Upeka and helping out so many organizations, AI-based organizations, and I understand many of us are trying to experiment with GenAI and see that what are the use cases we can build. So according to your experience, what has worked? What is working in the industry? Which are the different, say, verticals or like the different business processes which have got impacted positively and maybe negatively as such also?
I would say that, what has worked is still a lot of consumer use cases.
Yeah.
And what is going to work is what a lot of people here in the audience are already working on or should be working on, right? If they're not already doing it. In the consumer world, and I mean, what is interesting about ChatGPT is, OpenAI was a research company. It was building a research company. Then they came and released a couple of different applications. In fact, many people don't know they were first solving robotic hand problem. Right? That was the problem that we were trying to solve in 2016 and 17. That was, like, not going anywhere. Then they started experimenting with this text to image generation, which worked a little bit. But it was ChatGPT which took off because it was a combination of a great user experience that people are familiar with, right? And an AI, like, in the platform level that was backing it up. And then people looked at the demo and then they went, oh, wow, this is fantastic, right? So on the consumer or even at the prosumer level, where the input is through a prompt, and then there is an output that is generated either in terms of text, video, 3D model, or like a workflow, is this what people are, like, exploring right now. So whatever is working, and something that I'm using on a daily basis is I'm doing grammar checks. I'm doing, like, expansion of, small text that I want to turn it into a write-up. That is what is working from a consumer perspective. From a business perspective, a lot of people are tinkering, right? But we also are seeing, I mean, like, there was this conversation within our own group of saying, this airline was trying to use a chat bot, and then, it gave wrong answers. So who holds the liability for it, which leads to the hallucination problem. I know some of us in this room are solving. I know Dilip is trying to solve that problem in a very, very unique way using Cognoswitch and knowledge graph. So some of these use cases in the enterprise will take time. And some of these fundamental issues with respect to reliability and hallucination will have to be fixed first before we do. But even with that, if you were to still talk about use cases, here is how I am thinking about it, right? And so OpenAI's mission is what? OpenAI's mission is we want to see AGI. And like, if you believe Sam Altman, he's saying it is by 2027 or 2028. I mean, without getting into the societal and the, like, deeper philosophical discussion about it, he's saying that, look, it is going to be as good that it can solve like lot of problems, right? So the equivalent of, from an enterprise perspective, is what I like to call as ambient AI. which means that AI is practically everywhere. And every application that we can imagine in an enterprise is actually powered by AI. So which means that there is going to be a phenomenal productivity boost. But that is the vision that is going to come after many, many years, right? And it will go through multiple phases. And what is going to happen is that this productivity boost that is happening, and if this becomes that level of ambient, then in enterprise, what happens? There is a process. That process is facilitated by a tool. People in the enterprise, they call it as digital transformation, something that we were doing pen and paper and speaking over phone, we are bringing it into a digital process. And in that digital process, you would then use a tool, right? So if you are doing sales, then you would use a tool called CRM. If you're doing finance, or if you are doing like a large manufacturing organization, the tool will be called as ERP. So ambient AI, which means that outcomes are going to be immediately available. So tools will get replaced by outcome. That is the arc that is going to happen. But before that happens, workflow contraction will happen, right? A lot of redesign of workflows will happen where the workflow will become instead of using 10 steps, it may use 2 steps or 3 steps. And that redesign is what is going to happen. And within that, if I were to take use cases, those use cases that will take, and we are already seeing the evidence of this, right? Where the stakes or the risk is the least. Risk of this going wrong is the least. Like you already see that practically many people, even in this call, will already be using GitHub or GitHub Copilot, right? Where the use of a GenAI supported tool to augment the code writing that you're doing, because the risk of that going wrong is not that very high, and the person that is involved is highly technical. The mistakes can be corrected really, really easy. Correct. The next use case that is coming up is saying, hey, how do we automate or do workflow minus on customer support, right? Then other type of cost functions in HR, in finance, in legal, these type of cost functions will come in, where again workflow minus will happen. It'll take a long period of time before, even there we are seeing this hallucination issue create havoc, right? It'll take a long period of time before we come to the revenue functions, which are sales and marketing and things like that, right? And then eventually it'll be ambient AI. So this is the type of use case in terms of phases it will kind of progress forward.
Interesting. Dr. Arjun, let me rephrase, because you have been practicing GenAI at your organization also. You have a team and you're trying to crack some of the toughest problems for the industry out there. Would you like to throw some light on such use cases? Because you have been more focused on the cracking vision problems, while this evolved as more from natural language side, NLP side, large language models. So what are the use cases you see, and what are the challenges you see, even with the best team, to crack customer problems?
Right. So GenAI is new. It's just getting started, right? If we were to talk on the lines of, say, Andrew Ng's recent talk, if you kind of paint the landscape, it is still supervised learning, which, is the bigger chunk. So supervised learning is here and your Gen AI is here, but this will grow. This will, of course, also grow. So majority of our business is traditional ML still, though using newer techniques, how to do it more efficiently, newer architectures, and so on. But at the same time, we are dabbling with GenAI. So one of the very interesting products that we have built is text to SQL, so natural language query processing, right? So this is straightforward, where we have done it such that no data leaves the enterprise's LAN or servers, and all we need is the database schema, and then based on that database schema and the natural language question, we return a valid SQL, an explanation of that SQL, and then they can run that SQL on their databases. So this is something that has helped some of our clients. This is still, again, very new, and we're seeing how far we can take this. At the same time, we are building a personal information system based application, a phone application, and it is here that Rajan was talking about, that where you can make mistakes. For example, you can ask so suppose you're logging your thoughts every day, and then you can ask it to summarize. You can ask to search and summarize. You can ask questions like, how many times did I speak to Amit or Rajan? How many times did I consume sugar? If you are logging those thoughts, you can then ask, what meetings do I have planned for the day? What are my major thoughts? What am I thinking about? So those kind of things is something where I think the power of such models will unleash. And if you want to get it really accurate, where you want to remove hallucinations and so on, then of course, like Rajan said, go the knowledge graph or the RAG way. But this is what I see is where LLMs are starting to come in addition to all the use cases that Rajan pointed us to.
Great, great. Arjun, one additional question. You mentioned that the text to SQL, that application which you have built, in that the data doesn't leave the servers. And I think whenever we talk about, say, even using, say, ChatGPT, right? And it has happened in the early days that in Samsung, the data got leaked and got to OpenAI servers. Organizations have been very, very skeptical about how to, especially when it comes to enterprise adoption, right? And they always feel that, okay, it's a great technology to use, but what about the privacy? What about the protection of data, right? So do you see any trends out there which is being done at an industrial scale to solve these kind of problems, and do you see what kind of adoption enterprises are bringing in?
Yeah, so we still use ChatGPT APIs. We use GPT-4 APIs for our text to SQL application. However, we send it only the database schema, and then it is about prompting, about asking the right questions, such that it returns valid SQL. The way to, but I mean, if you needed the entire database, and if you did not want to send that data to OpenAI or similar, organizations, then the only way would probably be to have a on-premise installation, which is pretty straightforward these days, right? You have Hugging Face where you can even fine-tune, instruction fine-tune, DPO, RLHF, and so on. But then on-premise installation is the way to go if you do not want data to leave your servers.
Got it. Got it. Rajan, your thoughts on what not to do with GenAI? I mean, we are experimenting a lot with using GenAI and building something. Basically, this is coming from the perspective of cost of using GenAI. So we just saw a couple of days ago this article about Air Canada. The bot invented a return policy or something, which then got the company into the soup, right? So just like a human, because it is trying to mimic a human, it can commit mistakes, which is the hallucination problem, as you mentioned, it is already known about. So looking at the current perspective, like what should be avoided for GenAI, especially when you're building for enterprises?
So I would say, what should be avoided is hype, right? Because I'm very, very excited. I turned from I was I was big into AI, that, I delved into the philosophy of AI and trying to figure out, strong AI and weak AIs is not possible. And a defining book in my life was a book called Emperor's New Mind, where the author talks about why strong AIs is not possible. But what has happened in the field of AI is that heightened expectation, and then a lot of money goes in, and then when people start looking at the real possibility of what it can do, then they get disappointed and then they don't come back again. So the biggest thing I am crossing my fingers on is that let this not be like a AI winter again. I have a lot of reasons to believe that it won't be a AI winter, but what is the thing not to do is not to hype expectations too much, right? And not to hype expectations for people also. So therefore, I really, really like what Sam has been doing, right? While he's being very visionary, but he's also toning down the expectation of people and saying, hey, maybe this is possible, maybe that is possible. And every time if you see Sam, he beats expectation, including the Sora that he did, right? He did not set the expectation saying that, all of this will happen, and boom, one day he comes and launches something, and then, it is beating expectation. So generally, as a founder, the mindset I think, we should adopt is not to either give into hype or even sort of sell hype to customers. And if you are able to set low expectation and make sure that you are beating the expectation, that I would say is from a umbrella perspective. What I would also say is that look, we're all excited by the vision that
Right.
tools will get replaced by outcome. But what I would highly encourage everybody to do is to actually always keep the human in the loop, not because of anything as like, no, we need to protect jobs or etc. like that, to just make sure that we are managing the risks when we are making the change. See, when we actually go from one architecture to another architecture, you don't want to actually completely just throw away what it was there before, right? I mean, a good engineer will say, hey, I'm going to refactor.
Right.
And in software engineering, the biggest thing to do is to rewrite. I mean,
True.
don't code again completely, right? Don't take a system and then, completely. So if you think about it from a system design principle perspective, so I would say refactor. And when you're thinking about workflows that are already there and you're trying to replace it with a GenAI powered workflow, don't at the first level itself think about completely removing human from the equation. Think about re-engineering it. Think about that, if there were 10 steps that were involved in a workflow, right? How can it be like, 2 steps? And how can it be like, different UX, right? But don't take human completely out of the equation. I mean, technically we may call it human in the loop or things like that, but that is the first thing that I would say. Now, I have other things to say if you are thinking about it more from like, just getting started, you're trying to get PMF. What I would say is that, start with the services mindset, which is like, look, I need to deliver this outcome, right? And to deliver this outcome, I need to build tools. And what has happened is the cost of building the tool is like, slashing massively, including the availability of Copilot, including the availability of you can actually turn natural language itself into a programming language. Using all of that, you redesign and recreate your own tools. But you start with the mindset of saying, hey, this is the outcome that I'm going to deliver to the customer. So have a services mindset. In fact, what I would say is that like building a services outcome company is what will always make you focus on the value, and then continuously build and rebuild the tools that you are already using to say, hey, how can I do this in a lot more efficient kind of a way? Those are the 2 things that I would say at a high level, Amit.
Sure, Rajan. So picking up from Rajan's point, Rajan mentioned about programmers would always like to refactor or say revisit their say code base. And there's a very funny thing going on where we say that with AI, programmers are programming themselves out of the job. So coming back to you, Dr. Arjun, you have a team which works on all these cutting edge technologies, including AI, Gen AI. And I'm thinking more from the job market, from the skills market of the data team itself, right? So traditionally, a data team has been a combination of analysts, engineers, data scientists, AI ML engineers, maybe some PhDs, right? Who have been coming together to solve business problems, right? How do you see that dynamics change? Do you see any roles at risk? Do you see new roles evolving? Or like, how do you even think about working in a team in this new setup?
Yeah, so I mean, like Rajan said, right? The human in the loop is what I am betting on. So I don't think the role is changing as much. I mean, you'll still have those roles, but they will all be using the best tools available, which happen to be Gen AI today. It's just that the productivity of such teams would probably drastically increase. I mean, it has definitely increased for us, how we use these tools on a daily basis, what kind of checks we have before we even send out an email or commit code, and so on. So these are the process changes that we bring into our team because of GenAI. But because of GenAI, our team is only more productive, and they're able to solve bigger things which we were not able to earlier. So, I mean, I only see people becoming more efficient using these modern tools.
So every team can do much more compared to what they were able to do. And it primarily, we can say that GenAI is acting more as a productivity enhancer for every particular role which exists, right?
Yeah, that's how I see it.
All right. And also a connected question is on the philosophy of building application. So like we have been building application and we have been building in a very traditional way. Okay, there's a UI and there are a set of screens going on. Then we have a front end, back end, right? And on the other side, I hear these conversations that, hey, you need to fundamentally change the way you are building applications to leverage this. Again, what's the substance here? Like, should we go there, or how should we take it forward? First to Arjun and then to Rajan.
That's a very good question, Amit. So, because we are building applications, so one is a client in the US, and it's a physiotherapy app. So you have an assessment phase where we assess based on certain, squats. So if the left is lower than the right, then there's some. So all that is done in a non-generative way, traditional, use some neuromorphic and so on with Intel. But you then do the assessment. Okay, this is the problem. And now the question was, how do we show it and how do we get them to perform certain exercises? So the traditional way was, okay, we gave them a set of 6 exercises and then they were supposed to just repeat those. But the UI people, they came up with a much better interface, which was much more engaging, which was again based on chat. The chat can have videos, the chat can have buttons to press, how am I feeling today? But it was essentially a conversation instead of just a task that the user is supposed to finish. It is now a conversation, and this conversation is fluid and it's alive. So based on this, we find way more engagement. And trust me, the most difficult thing you can do is to get a person to exercise. I think a lot of good companies have tried to do this, and I guess therapy is no different, but what we measure and we find that there is more engagement if you structure your UI and your interaction like so.
Got it. Rajan, your comments on
Yeah,
this?
so see, in terms of how the mental model that you use to actually approach this, right? What you called as philosophy, I think it changes subtly, but it changes like in a big way, and like the impact will be felt over a period of time, right? So for instance, when we write program first, right? When we are working in like non-GenAI environment of building application, we are actually working with what is called as deterministic. What does the word deterministic mean? If you give an input and then you put it through a system, which is called as a deterministic system, it will give an output, right? But if you work with a non-deterministic system, if you give an input, it may not give the same output all the time. Right? That's the difference between a deterministic and a non-deterministic system, right? So like you may have experienced this if you're using ChatGPT, which is like when you give the input multiple times, there is no guarantee that it will be the same output every time, right? However, like all of us who have written program, we are only used to deterministic systems. Right? We give some input and the outputs are going to be very, very deterministic, right? So we will have to adjust our own mental model to deal with this. Right? In terms of saying, okay, if the answers are going to be non-deterministic, what does it mean to the quality of the outcome that we are expecting? I mean, it will work in some areas, it can't work in some areas, right? If you are asking the system to read an invoice and say, hey, how much is spending? It cannot say one time $100, another time $100,000, right? So so that is the difference in terms of deterministic versus non-deterministic system, and that has to be kept in mind when you're building a GenAI application, right? How do you factor that in and how do you actually solve for it? It is both a bug and a feature. I mean, depends on the perspective that you take, right? So that is one change that I would say. The other thing that I would say is that when people are going to think about it from a role of a design, right? If you actually think about the design, or if you think about the user interface with a computer system, if you really think about a computer, it is almost like how an Indian manager is, right? You basically just an Indian manager, the way he works with his employees is he'll say, okay, here are 5 tasks. I want you to come and execute it and then come and report back to me. So you will tell the computer, okay, I click here, like, after that it is going to press some work and then, complete the task and give response. But what GenAI does, or like an application like Midjourney and ChatGPT does, is it works like a US manager. The US manager does not tell you what is a task to do. He will tell you that this is the outcome I'm looking for. He will describe the why and the what. He will not describe the how. The Indian manager will describe the how, right? So you will say that this is what I'm looking for. Then you figure out how to do the how, and then come back. But many a times, if the outcome that you are getting is not what you expected in your mind, you're going to ask the question again and again and again. So
Right.
what ends up happening is the paradigm of interaction moves from defining tasks to defining outcomes. Now, what does this do in terms of application process? Is that, let's say you're doing design. And so if you were to give a brief to a designer, you'll tell the designer, oh, I want you to come up with a campaign poster that has, it's one tree, two cars, and then, something that can, sort of create an emotion. But now you will write this and give it to Midjourney, and then you will expect something to come. You may not like the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one. You may actually generate 100 of them and then say, which one should I pick? So the role of the designer changes from the person who is actually taking the brief from you and translating into low level design to one that of a curator.
Right.
Because the paradigm of interaction changes, the role of the designer and the application developer change. Because the paradigm of the system is different. The role of the application developer and the designer change. Right. So this is what will change when you are building for GenAI application. It looks very subtle right now, but the impact of this will be felt over years, right? Because of how we are thinking about developing applications. That I think is going to be the big change that will happen because of how we use our systems with us.
Got it.
I
This brings
just
to my
wanted to
last
add to Rajan
Yes.
that deterministic versus non-deterministic output is something that these new age developers will have to deal with, right? People dealing with GenAI. In addition, we have to deal with maybe model changes by the company itself. And lastly, we also need to deal with guardrails. For example, this chatbot that I was talking about, so somebody complained, I have pain on my right hip, and it said, go apply ice. So those are not the kind of answers you wanted, though it may be a correct answer. So how do you make sure that it only replies within the realm of that app, the universe, right? So those are things that we need to learn and to be able to use efficiently.
Definitely. I think that was my question actually follow. Because of this being non-deterministic and being, say, creative or hallucinating, there's always an implication of it. And we've kind of started seeing that, right? If the guardrails are not in place. And I believe that's going to be and that might already be happening, that companies which are focusing on bringing these guardrails as you build these applications. Great. I think great conversation, Rajan and Arjun. Let's open up for Q&A. I see Gaurav raised hand for quite some time. Maybe you can go first, Gaurav.
So Rajan, I think you mentioned that in the enterprise world or in the business world, the things would change slightly slowly, right? And we would be more moving towards outcomes rather than tasks and workflows. And again, this is very amorphous, right? Because again, in our mental model, we are all looking at tasks. Whenever we are looking at applications, we are all looking at tasks, right? So imagine a world where there is no hallucination, where there are no security concerns and nothing. So what would a CRM look like in a generative AI world? What is your thought on what would a generative AI CRM looks like? Or would there be no CRM and it would be an entirely different world?
Yeah, actually, it's a good question. I try to think about it, and I speak to a lot of people. At this point in time, there are 2 or 3 application design patterns that are emerging, right? One is the Copilot that the world, anybody who's doing Gen AI knows about Copilot. The other is the whole agent-based framework. And the other one is a lot more AI hidden inside the workflow and trying to automate. But from a front end perspective, people are talking a Copilot, but Copilots which are not completely chat based with some amount of point and click and Copilot integrated so that that refactoring move is happening. So by and large, one of these user interfaces is what is emerging as the top application design pattern. Because of this, my guess is that underneath, it may not matter if there is a CRM or if there is a ERP or things like that. right? And like I said, I mean, we're perhaps just, peeping into the crystal ball here and trying to make prediction. But if you really think about it, if there is one large, chat interface, or like one large UX interface, which could be chat or multimodal, right? Which is used to interact with all the data that you have in an organization. And because of LLMs have the power of taking data from one application data model and can easily, put it into another one. And we've seen these, primitive demos almost a year ago, where Microsoft was able to pull out data from PowerPoint and then completely present the same data into Word and, any other system. So LLMs have the power of, orchestrating this data. So therefore, taking the data out from a CRM and orchestrating it to another data table is not going to be that much of a challenge itself. See, what do people buy? People buy interfaces and they buy category names, right? And the way the budgets work is, okay, I'm going to put a budget for CRM, right? And the CRM tool is what is going to actually make sure that my sales guy's workflow is digitized. The sales guy's collaboration is digitized, so that I can find a lot of productivity gain on that. But if there is going to be only one single interface, the biggest impact that I see in the world of software is the words called CRM, ERP, etc. will all go through a redesign. Right? The names will be completely different. Maybe there will be one front-end chat interface and one inside chat interface, right? Inside the organization, the front-facing and the employee-facing chat interface, and then the data models can talk to each other seamlessly. So so I don't know if there will be a CRM as a category. Now, it's not going to happen in day 10 or day 100 or things like that. It'll take time. But you can actually see that this is what is spooking people, right? This is what is leading to Mark Benioff to go on Twitter and then say, hey, I'm trying to hire LLM engineers and things like that. Right? So yeah, it's a I would say that, we can only speculate, but I would to the useful tip that I would take is that all of us should focus on UX.
Got it.
Because the answer will be in the UX.
Yeah.
Because what we can understand is that, look, the ability of these LLMs and the ability of the data to actually go from one application to another will be there. Right? The platforms will come up. The other thing, Prasanna often says is that, what we should be focusing on is on the services, right? I mean, this is a thing that we are trying to actually have conversation with a lot of founders is, see, in India, we have this thing about services versus product. We don't do services. We are only like a product company, right? But as time progresses, there is not going to be much of a difference between services and product as a company, right? I mean, I keep saying that, look, as Infosys is a services company with $1 billion of revenue, 100,000 people, and 25% profit after tax. And if that same $1 billion revenue can be done with 2,000 people, 10,000 people, maybe the profit margins will go up to 50, 60%. And why people like product companies, it has 80% margin.
Yeah.
Right. So you have this nice trade-off, right, where you will use a lot less number of people, but deliver the same thing. What people don't like about the services company is to scale a services company, you'll have to scale the headcount. But AI provides this opportunity where if you focus on the outcome and if you focus on the UX, you will find the answer faster to what the new CRM is.
Got it. I have another question to maybe Arjun. So, and this comes from an imposter syndrome, right? So again, right now we are building in a way a wrapper over a GPT, a chat GPT, or all the available models, right? And the imposter syndrome comes that should we now fundamentally develop our own models, or how is the world transforming? Are people going to use wrappers or the existing LLMs, or as in the past, people were developing their own AI, small models, etc.? How would this transformation happen?
Yeah, so the thing about wrappers, and especially thin wrappers, is the work that you have put in. And if you've put in very little work, then others can do so and replicate what you have done, unless you have some other, secret ingredient, some IP, some data, something that you bring on the table. So And I see all of these as tools. I mean, when deep learning came out, it was like a big sledgehammer. You don't want to use a sledgehammer to sort numbers, right? You can write your bubble and quicksort for that. So use GPTs as long as, it's a tool. If GPT cannot do something for you and you think you can train your own model, then go ahead and do that. But do whatever is the simplest, and that instead of just doing something that is fancy, something that is bigger. I think I am all about solving problems. I don't care how I solve it, but I want to solve those problems and solve it the best possible way. So that's how I look at that.
Got it.
So if I may add a little bit there, see, AI, in the domain of AI, there is some amount of tech tinkering that you'll have to do to say, hey, what the tools can allow you and make possible. So I have both a pro and an anti view to taking the wrapper approach, right? The pro view of taking a wrapper approach is, even if you're building just a little bit of a wrapper, it is fine. You look at that wrapper, you build that wrapper, and then you kind of move forward and see what happens with that, right? But what happens is that even if somebody else comes and disrupts, right, you would have had the learning, and then you should quickly move forward to that, right? But on the other hand, what I would say is that, look, the tech tinkering you will have to do, but don't get too much involved into the tinkering, right? So the two things that I suggest is, no GPU before product market fit, right? No open source before product market fit. You use OpenAI's API. See, Arjun is using OpenAI's API, right? So you use OpenAI's API to say, hey, how can I solve the problem? Once you know that you can solve that and the intelligence that you need is good enough, and you're able to solve that use case that is working, then you can say, okay, this is super expensive. I cannot afford the 100x cost that OpenAI is putting on me, right? Then you can say, okay, should I use a small model? Should I use an open source model? Should I do fine tuning and things like that, right? So most people get enamored, while though it is important to actually tinker and learn as to what these systems are, how do they work, but don't get lost in the PMF journey, right? So what will happen is, again in this wave, there will be like tons of new applications that will come up, just like how there were like many mobile app developers, but only few will take off. And everybody in this group should be in that few that take off, right? Not those things where they were all tried, it's all fun, unless of course you're doing it for fun.
Got it.
This question from Amit. Amit, if you can go ahead.
Hey, Amit.
Hey, so yeah, I think I was just following up on the comment and the discussion you were having, Rajan, around services approach versus product approach, and how AI kind of enables more outcome-based approach, which is closer to services. So any companies, new age companies or startups that you see successfully starting to do this? Of course, even the older ones and all the large services companies and everyone will say that now we are infusing AI and we are all AI driven. But anyone you think is able to do this successfully in the startup or any specific domain? Vertical or horizontal?
Short answer, and I'll give a long answer, right? The short answer is maybe you have chatted about is Binny Bansal is doing this startup, which is a stealth startup where he's saying that, all the e-commerce operations, he wants to actually replace, right? And not much is known about that. Very recently, I saw this one company that was funded by Emergence Ventures, where someone who had worked at IBM is saying that, a lot of fintech company uses mainframe code, right? So is saying, how do I'm going to sort of own the outcome, and I'm going to port all of that mainframe code to modern day code, right? So these are two examples. I don't remember the name of this second company that I'm referring to, but these are two examples. But here is what I would say. The long answer is, see, if you're going to wait for examples to come, it may become too late, right? So you may actually want to sort of go into this much earlier. So one of the questions that I'm fascinated, one of the questions that we are asking within Upeka is, see, when we take this PMF question, right, it starts with founder market fit, problem market fit, right? And then it is also a little bit of the Indian founder market fit. So we have to ask this question that, look, if we are trying to build an idea, and everybody in the world is trying to build an AI, what is the place where we can have some unique advantages in, right? And if I answer this question from a SaaS perspective, areas where there are verticals, areas which are boring, areas which are unsexy, right? Areas where you can apply a lot of tech to work on those boring problems is what you will not find competition from Valley. Right. So no Valley company, if in fact, if you think about the entire, like, B2B versus services, see the entire B2B SaaS is about $250 billion in revenue, I think last year. The entire SaaS is roughly about $1.3 trillion, right? Which is like Infosys and like, Accenture, all of that put together. With AI, these both of them are like, getting fused. But all the people who are trying to build out this $250 billion, out of which, like, India has only added $7 billion to that $250 billion, they are again going to think about tools and platforms, right? They don't want to think about these services because it feels like, oh, services, I don't want to do it. So you have to ask this question in PMF in the perspective of saying, hey, what is it that I can do which will give me an odd to win against a SF company? Right? Therefore, you may not find a lot of examples. But this might be the area where you can have an edge as an Indian founder. Just like how in SaaS, like, vertical SaaS and boring places, like, how Browser Stack is doing, is what gives us the edge. We may actually have a lot of edge in vertical AI services. So you have to look at like what spaces where you can go. I mean, looking at examples maybe may make it late.
Got it. I'll follow up with you on this one.
Sure.
We do have two more questions. I'm not sure if we are one from Giridhar to. Okay, Giridhar, can you go ahead? Maybe you can answer that.
Yeah.
Maybe this could be the last question, and then we
Yeah.
wrap up.
Yeah.
I have to get
So,
to another.
Rajan and Dr. Arjun, I think one of you or both of you can answer this question. So, Rajan, I heard you say that what Prasanna was saying starts off with the UI, right? In terms of infusing AI itself into your application. So, can you describe that stack, how it is looking like? While the front end may be something like a ChatGPT, but if you want to add AI to your enterprise application, what is that stack looking like? Is it like AI that sits on a database, or and then the UI comes on top of
Okay,
it?
I
Or
think
what
two
is kind
parts of the
stack?
question, if I may, and I'll take this real quick. So two parts of this, or two ways to think about it. One is if most of the GenAI application that I'm seeing is what I'm calling it a Stovel stack: TypeScript, OpenAI, vector database, and a LangChain. Right? This is the new stack that people are using to build a GenAI application. But the other way to think about this is that it doesn't have to be like, chat. It has to be an interface that people are very comfortable with. So I actually spoke to a company, Indian company that's doing 20 million in revenue. They already are selling an outcome to bus operators, right? And what they do is that they interact with a lot of people who are not very tech savvy. They sell them outcome. They internally are building tools, right? They sell them outcome. And what they do is they are building something where a bus operator can ask, saying, okay, give me reports of what happened with, how the bus did in this last 1 week. Now that Hindi or like, local languages is getting turned into text. That text is getting turned into a SQL, and that SQL is getting executed as a query, and then it is coming back as a report. Now this is phase one. The phase two is that then he can even click on that report and say, hey, I want this changed. Right? This to me is like a fantastic use case of different way of reimagining the experience, right? And enabling people who would have traditionally not thought of it. And this guy is someone who's not very savvy to say, okay, I want this, and write a SQL query or create an Excel template and give input here. If you are to do an application like this 5 years ago, you'll have to invest at least $10-15 million, see that, a Hindi to English translation is working, then see that the English to text translation is working. But all of that is below the API right now.
I had a question, Dilip here.
Dilip, can I speak to you one-on-one later?
Okay.
I need
Thank
to
you.
jump. I'm getting late for another meeting.
Yeah, maybe Dr. Arjun can reply to this if you're jumping up.
Okay. All right. So, Amit, I will take leave. Great chatting with you, Arjun.
Thanks, sir.
Rajan, talk soon.
Doc, yeah, thanks, Rajan. Doc, we heard a lot of discussions around, everything positive, nice, How do you think enterprise is going to take this? I mean, you talked about architecture. Basically, my limited understanding, I started working on AI in the late 80s when symbolic and expert systems were in vogue. And of course, now you have GenAI. My feeling is the architecture is the key to why LLMs cannot do certain things we are all imagining. Because the hallucination is, like Sam said, it's like smoking weed, and it's one of the biggest features of why all this great generation works, because you need those creative skills. You smoke and then you sit down and write your screenplay or your story. That's great for some of the use cases maybe we were discussing today. But how about enterprises? How about how do you think this will happen? Do you think enterprise is going to let LLM take over and run the business? SOPs, policies, regulations?
So I think like any technology, I mean, it'll permeate, it'll make it more efficient. For example, let's take HR, right? So there's so many things in HR that an LLM can already do. For example, performance reviews. So, I mean, it just takes all data generated by a person, be it code, be it chat, be it whatever, self-assessment, and it puts it together and kind of maybe rates that person, and the manager, it presents that to the manager. And for managers who are managing maybe 30 50 direct reportees, it is the worst time of the year to do that kind of a review. So I envision it to come into enterprise via these avenues, and hopefully with time we'll develop algorithms, we'll develop models, the kind of things that you are doing, right? So that we reduce hallucination and then they can be used even more directly.
Yeah, so I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but if I interpret that probably in some way, you're saying that the architecture will change, because and what I know about LLMs, the inbuilt architecture on LLM is not supposed to keep fundamental knowledge or concepts related to whatever you're doing. Patterns, yes. Nuances of natural language, yes. But do you think that the architecture will now transform to be able to now start dynamically imbibing enterprise knowledge into the LLM?
So I don't know what the architecture is anymore, right? Because OpenAI is a closed company. So they don't publish their architecture in the white paper that they have published. They don't talk about how this mixture of experts work and what their true architecture is, and if they're using memory and how they're using it, so on. So it's already very opaque. I do think it'll change. It is changing every day. New papers are coming out. A lot of them are about new architectures. If the fundamental transformer will change, well, if history is to repeat itself and whatever we have learned from it, sure, it will. I don't know when or how, but yeah, I think we'll see where we get to. Interesting times.
Good. Thank you.
Amit, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Dr. Arjun. Thanks a lot for all the participants. I think we have exceeded our timeline, but yeah, that shows that like it's an interesting discussion which can continuously go on. Thanks a lot, Dr. Arjun, and of course, thanked Rajan. So we are good. I think we're good to disconnect then. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining in.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone, for
Megha,
joining.
for organizing this.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Thanks, Doc.
Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you.